It's beautiful. So yeah, just as you come in, please mute your microphones. Well, good morning, everyone, and good evening to John in the United States, where he's in Florida. And thank you for joining us, John. And we're here today to have our education morning, which is a little bit different. We normally have ours in the evening, but because John's in the US and he's got a very important topic to talk about, we are now doing this in the morning. And today our speaker is John Lentini. John's been a huge person in fire investigation over the last 30 or 40 years, starting out in the late 70s. He's been on, he's done everything in fire investigation. He's been on the 921 Technical Committee for over 20 years, and he's been on the 1033 Technical Committee and still on it for over 20 years as well. He's written books, published many articles, but today we've got him in to talk about a report that was released in the United States earlier this year from the Organisation of Scientific Area Committees for Forensic Science. And this report talks about what's happening in fire investigation in the United States and I guess a way forward. And John was actually a part of the committee on that, that report. And he's going to talk about what is happening in that. And this is very important for us in Australia and New Zealand because everything in fire investigation does happen in the US, but certainly being aware of what is happening in the US is important to what's happening in our countries. So thank you, John, for joining us, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'm going to talk about the OSAC, Organization of Scientific Area Committees. Doesn't that sound like a nice bureaucratic government name? It came about as a result of fire investigation and other forensic sciences, all having these scientific or technical working groups to write standards and guides. And they were all, they all had their own rules. They all operated differently. And in 2009, it was decided that this was not a good way to operate, that we all ought to be on the same page. It took until 2014 for people to figure out how it worked or how to make it work. And that was a memo between the Memorandum of Understanding between the US Department of Justice and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They got together and decided they were going to set up this organization. And we've been working since 2014. And have done a lot of things, but our major output this year was the strategic vision. It's now a guidance document. Let me see if I can get this thing set up. Slideshow and share screen. Oh. Come on now. What are you guys seeing over there?
Yeah, so we can see your view, not the slideshow view yet.
All right, let me work on this. I do have a slideshow here. I guess I just need to turn it on. Play from start. All right.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, John.
Make that go away. All right, the title is Strengthening Fire and Explosion Investigations in the United States, a Strategic Vision for Moving Forward. This document was the brainchild of our first committee chair in OSAC, Dr. Craig Byler. And he continues with the committee. We have a new chair, Mr. Phil Crombie from the Travelers Insurance Company. Let me see if I can make this advance. Here we are. And do that, hide thumbnails. So this is the name of the organization, the Fire and Explosion Investigation Subcommittee of the Organization of Scientific Area Committees in Forensic Science. And we are managed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a government agency that goes back a long way, back to more than 100 years. It used to be called the National Bureau of Standards. So this is a strategic vision for moving forward in fire investigation. All right, here we go. This is what we're going to talk about this morning. Introduction of OSAC, what we have accomplished over the last 7 years, the process that we went through in developing this strategic vision, and we'll talk about how it's laid out, give you summaries of the chapters, and then recommendations for research, and a path forward for each stakeholder. So the impetus for setting up the OSAC was the National Academy of Science report from 2009. That actually started, it was a mandate from our Congress to study forensic science, and they collected data from individuals in all disciplines of forensic science for a number of years. I think about 3 years they had hearings, and then they put their report out in 2009. It caused quite a bit of consternation because it was not kind to forensic science in the United States. It pointed out a lot of flaws, and a lot of forensic scientists got their feelings hurt by people saying bad things about how things are operating. But it was decided by the Department of Justice and NIST to try and do something about it. And so they set up this organization for scientific area committees. Here's the book. It was called Strengthening Forensic Science in the United States, A Path Forward. And it talked about all of the forensic science disciplines, but it, unlike most of the reports previously, it talked about fire investigation. And I will take responsibility for that, because when I heard they were doing this compilation and these hearings, I said to the organizers, please don't leave out fire investigation as you have in the past. And so they allowed me to come and testify about the state of the art in fire investigation. And we got a paragraph, which is better than nothing, because it allowed for the Justice Department to start funding research in fire investigation. But here's what they said. Much more research is needed on the natural variability of burn patterns and damage characteristics and how they are affected by the presence of various accelerants. Despite the paucity of research, some arson investigators continue to make determinations about whether or not a particular fire was set. However, according to testimony presented to the committee, that would be me, many of the rules of thumb are typically assumed to indicate an accelerant was used, e.g. alligatoring of wood, specific char patterns, have been shown not to be true. Experiments should be designed to put arson investigation on a more solid scientific footing. Well, I was gratified to see this, but I have seen that sentence, the last sentence, that experiments should be designed to put arson investigators on a more solid scientific footing. I had seen it someplace else, and I found it in a 1977 document by the Justice Department about arson and arson investigation. So we had not come all that far in terms of what the broader forensic science community thinks we should be doing. Now, with respect to fire investigation, I will say that we are far ahead of many of the forensic science disciplines in that we are willing to admit that things are not what they should be, and they certainly haven't been what they should be for all of these years. And many other forensic science disciplines are in denial You talk to fingerprint people or firearms people, they'll tell you, oh yeah, we're very solid. There's even bite mark people that think they're valid, and blood spatter people that think that they've got a solid scientific underpinning. And the OSAC is working on all of these areas. So this is the organization of scientific area committees. When I first saw this diagram, it reminded me of the Borg from Star Trek. We are Borg, lower your shields and prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile. We do have 5 different areas: digital multimedia, biology, DNA, chemistry, physics, and crime scene death investigation. That is a broad division of forensic sciences. And then fire and explosion investigations are a one committee under the crime scene and death investigations. So this is who we have on our committee. We've got federal law enforcement, people from the ATF. We have state fire marshals, private investigation firms, that would be me, and a couple of others, academics, laboratories, insurance representatives, and engineering. So we do represent a broad cross-section of stakeholders. So, as I said, the OSAC is a result of the 2009 report. And the aim of the OSAC is to identify and promote technically sound, consensus-based, fit-for-purpose documentary standards that are based on sound scientific principles. It's a joint project of DOJ and NIST, and they have 2 major areas of concentration. One is what's called a registry of forensic science standards. And the other one is to identify research needs. Now, initially, we thought that the OSAC subcommittees would be writing standards. And we found out that that's really a hard task. And there are already a couple of bodies that are writing standards. We have the National Fire Protection Association for fire investigation. There's ASTM for all kinds of forensic testing. And there's a relatively new organization called the Academy Standards Board, which is a child of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences that was just stood up about 5 years ago. And so what we do is we identify standards that are worthy of being on the registry and worthy of having the government tell people that's what you should be following. So one of the things that we've done with identifying research needs is to look at other organizations. And one of these is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This document, Forensic Science Assessments, Equality, and Gap Analysis, came out in 2017. And I'm everywhere. I was on this group that wrote this document, and it covers a lot of areas where more research is needed in fire investigation. But what our committee has done is to add NFPA 921 and NFPA 1033 to the register. And those are some of the first standards that were actually blessed by OSAC. We've also proposed and outlined a new standard for fire investigation units, and that is in progress with NFPA. So not only will you have to be concerned with 1033 and 921, you'll also have to be concerned with the standard for fire investigation units. It's not going to be as big as 921. It might be about the size of 1033. We are also writing quality assurance documents for fire investigators, fire investigation units. The first template that we came out with was a quality assurance manual. And we are also working on standard operating procedures or standard operating guides that are part of that quality assurance manual. We have proposed numerous changes in both NFPA 921 and NFPA 1033. 1033 just came out this summer, and it's reorganized and redefining a lot of the 16 subject matters, the list of 16 subject matter areas that fire investigators are expected to know. That list was redundant. It was not well organized in the previous edition of 1033, but it is now. And most of the changes that were adopted by NFPA came out of the OSAC Subcommittee. And then finally, what we're going to talk about today is the strategic plan for fire and explosion investigations. So we were one of the first groups to put any consensus documents on the registry. NFPA 921 was the second document added to the registry. 1033 was the fourth one. And both of these documents are well accepted in the field and by the courts. There's been some discussion and controversy about the 2021 edition of NFPA 921 in that we removed the chapter on classification. It wasn't working well since it was put in back, I think, around 2008. People would get confused between cause and classification of cause. And chapter 20 had 4 different classifications, whereas our National Fire Incident Reporting System had 6, and there are other groups that have even more different classifications. So in 2017, the 921 committee said that NFIRS, that National Fire Information Reporting System, a report in that is not really a fire investigation report, and it's beyond the scope of the document. So the classification chapter was removed in 2021. And then we were responsible, we being the OSAC committee, for proposing the reorganization and the definition of the 16 subject matter areas required by NFPA 1033. We took out thermometry, and we took out computer fire modeling from that list, but we added some more. We added some more things about building systems. And we added an annex to NFPA 1033 that goes into great detail about what it is we mean when we say a fire investigator should know fire chemistry. It used to just say fire chemistry, and that could mean anything. So we defined that to where there's like 12 different aspects of fire chemistry that a fire investigator should know. And we defined what fire dynamics means. It used to just say fire dynamics. As we went through that and we're writing this Annex D, it turns out we came up with 26 different aspects of fire dynamics. So 1033 is both a lot clearer, but there are a lot more specific topics that 1033 requires you to know about. So it's definitely worth your time to read through 1033, the new edition, and see what it is that is going to be expected. So this has been the paradigm in forensic science since a long time ago, back in the early 1990s, a guy from the FBI laboratory proposed this quality triangle in forensic sciences. And as we were looking at this, we saw that we had NFPA 1033 for, it forms a basis for certification programs. NFPA 921 forms the basis for standardization of fire investigations. But accreditation is something that just barely exists. We have 2 private organizations in the states that are accredited by a third party. There's also the national response team of the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which is our federal organization that is really the best fire investigation organization on the planet. They're very good. So they have gotten accredited, as has, I believe, the police department's fire investigation in Dubai. But accreditation really didn't have any documents to support it. And this is why we proposed NFPA 1031. We wrote a letter to the Standards Council, said there really does need to be something for the accreditation of organizations that do fire investigations. And we don't have that now. And the NFPA 921 Standards Council agreed that we should go ahead and write that. So this is what has come out. Right now, there's a draft, and I think it's available on the NFPA website. It's very general at this point. It has requirements for how to be organized and funded. Facilities and equipment, safety procedures, which is come to the forefront in the United States because so many fire investigators are falling out with lung cancer and other maladies caused by exposure to fire scenes. It's got requirements for training, certification, and education, although they are very loose at the moment. How to write an origin and cause report, or what should be in it, how to document scenes, and how to retain evidence. And I think you'll see a move toward requiring that people not destroy their notes. It's still technically allowed under NFPA 921. Hopefully that will change. Review and approvals of investigation reports and processes and management systems. Now, one of the benefits of this standard for organization and operation of FIUs is that you can go to the chief and say, we need money to do this, or we won't be in compliance. Certainly, there won't be any requirement that organizations become accredited, but this is a document that can be used to support accreditation, just like NFPA 1033 supports certification. So here is the proposed standard. We sent it in August of 2019, and it is being worked on now. Randy Watson, who chaired the NFPA 921 committee for 10 years, he's the chairman of this committee. He's also the incoming president of the IAAI, and I don't know where he finds the time to do any actual work, but he has definitely been just performed yeoman service for the profession, and is now chairman of the 1321 committee. The standard will provide best practices for effective management. It'll provide more support for budget requests. It'll be suitable to support and provide a path to accreditation for fire and explosion investigation units. It will help manage risk associated with lawsuits, bad public relations, and wrongful convictions. It will improve the credibility of the work product, and it will enhance the organization's reputation if they are able to say, we comply with this document. All right, so that's an overview of what we've been doing. And what we're going to talk about now is the strategic plan. This plan was modeled after the NAS 2009 report. It has taken over 4 years to produce. It was approved by the various levels of OSAC and the Forensic Science Standards Board, which runs OSAC, and it was published in August of 2021. So you're not behind if you haven't read it, but you can read it. It's up on the NIST website. I'm going to go through what's in it now. So the first half is a description of the current state of the art in fire and explosion investigation, and also the state of how governance occurs. The second half is the strategic plan, a path forward. It's about 150 pages. It's got a research agenda and recommendations for the development of the profession. Chapter 1. It's got an executive summary, introduction, what is fire and explosion investigation, and what are the challenges that we face. Chapter 2 is a current structure of the fire investigation community and the need for integrated governance. So we talk about oversight, licensing, and research, and standards. The conclusions, and I'm going to skip over the meat of these chapters and just get you to the conclusions, because you don't want me to read a 150-page document. Today's fire investigation profession offers numerous avenues for professional development. Fire investigators and the agencies that employ them are urged to avail themselves of these opportunities. Staying abreast of current research is required if an investigator wishes to become and remain credible. Investigators are encouraged to join professional organizations, attend training, read journals, and most importantly, become certified. We have, I think, less than a third of the fire investigation professionals in the United States that are certified. So we're trying to encourage more of that. It's not a panacea. Just getting past that test does not necessarily make you a good fire investigator, but it makes you a better one. And it shows that you care about professional development. The methodology has changed dramatically over the last 3 decades as the industry has moved from art to science. The profession has chosen to use the open committee process at NFPA so that everyone has an opportunity to participate. The content of NFPA 921 and NFPA 1033 are the result of thousands of public comments and hundreds of face-to-face meetings. And I would invite all of you to become involved in the process. You don't need to be an NFPA member. You can just go to the website, make your comments and make your suggestions for changing NFPA documents, and the technical committee has to take you seriously. They have to address your suggestions. Chapter 3 talks about the admission of fire and explosion investigation evidence in litigation. This is a big deal in the United States. We haven't gotten around to hot tubbing with the other experts yet. as you have in Australia. But we have a case called Daubert, and just about every fire investigation or every fire litigation, once it gets to court, somebody moves to exclude the experts based on Daubert. So the Daubert decision just made it plain to judges that they had a role to keep junk science out of the courtroom. So we discussed the role of the gatekeepers, the reports and testimony. There's a discussion on level of certainty, which is a controversial topic. Then the impact of Daubert and 921, and the impact of Nfpa 1033. 1033 has become very important lately in the United States, simply because it can be used, that list of 16 subject matter areas, that can be used to get somebody disqualified as a witness here. We have people, and unfortunately, I'm not happy about this, but probably half the people in the United States doing fire investigation can't define radiant heat flux or tell you what the units of measure are. We have people that, if you dig deep enough, you found out they don't even know what a watt is. And that doesn't result in a lot of exclusions because the case never gets to trial. If counsel knows that, oh, this expert doesn't know the definition of a watt, he's going to find a way to avoid putting him on a witness stand. And what generally happens in the States is that when somebody flunks this quiz on 1033 subject matter areas, cases tend to settle. Yeah, and here it is. Challenges to the investigator's qualifications based on Nfpa 1033 are likely to become more common. I will tell you that that's mostly what I've been doing for the last few years, is helping lawyers challenge the guy on the other side based on Nfpa 1033. So this hopefully will result in a more careful vetting of fire investigators and an overall improvement in the quality of evidence presented to courts and juries. Chapter 4, we talk about the scientific principles and interpreting scientific data. We go through the basic methodology. This is all sort of falls out of Nfpa 921. We get to reliability and uncertainty and error at the end and discuss how things are. The main thing that needs to be recognized is that fire and explosion investigation is a forensic science. So we should be able to require investigators to articulate their scientific reasoning. And you are seeing a lot of this, or at least in the States, we are seeing a lot of this where people are looking at reports and saying, really, is that all there is? You can't just tell me what you think. It's like grammar school in an arithmetic class. You have to show your work. And there have been a few court decisions in the US where the judge says, this guy didn't show his work. He just says what he thinks and doesn't tell us why. So we're requiring rigorous independent review other than through the adversarial process is one method of assuring technically sound decisions. We shouldn't have to get into court before it is recognized that we have a problem with a particular investigation. And then we have chapter 5, descriptions of some of the investigative disciplines that are involved. Obviously, scene examination, documenting the scene, evidence collection and preservation, interviews. There is a long discussion of non-scene data. This is things you learn away from the fire scene. how to present your conclusions. And there's also a discussion of bias. Fire and explosion investigation involves a determination of the origin, the cause, and development. The investigation process is fundamentally based on the scientific method. So we talk about testing hypotheses, both for origin and cause. And importantly, we say a cause is determined if one and only one cause hypothesis survives hypothesis testing. You'll find this in Nfpa 921, where it says your cause has to be uniquely consistent with the data. Your origin has to be uniquely consistent with the data. You can't just say consistent, it has to be uniquely consistent. Now we're getting into what we can do in the future to improve methods, practice, and performance. We talk about the team approach to fire and explosion investigations. There's a long discussion about bias and what data might be task relevant and not task relevant. And this is in each of the remaining chapters, we come up with recommendations. So we recommend a team approach. We recommend task force assignments with neighboring jurisdictions. And one beauty of the task force is that if you're in a small town or even a small city, you might not get a lot of investigation. But if you're in a task force, you can join with other jurisdictions and just have a larger body of investigations to work on and experience you can get. We talk about reports. We say the report should include all data collected, all hypotheses formulated, details of the testing process for each hypothesis, and the conclusions of the investigation. And we also recommend that all stakeholders must take responsibility for requiring complete and comprehensive fire and explosion investigation reports. So make people show their work. Judges should not let opinions in front of a jury if the methodology that the investigator used is not the scientific method. We talk about minimizing potential bias. And all we say really is we should implement information management practices. Well, there's different ways of doing that. The most important one is to have one guy that knows everything, or one investigator that knows everything about the case, and another person that just focuses on the physical evidence, and try to keep that information away from somebody. Like, you know, if you see a for sale sign in the front yard of a residence, well, that's data. You can't unsee the sign, but it's not going to help you determine the origin and cause, except for the fact that you know there's a realtor, and that realtor's probably got a bunch of photographs of the fire scene before the fire. So it will tell you about a source of data, but it's not going to tell you where the fire started. Chapter 7 deals with research needs in fire and explosion investigation, establishing a research agenda, and more importantly, how do you get that research into practice? Research agenda should be adopted by research funding agencies and should be carried out over the next several years. We identified 10 research agenda items for origin determination, including fire patterns, arc mapping, witness information, and fire dynamics. We have a research agenda item for cause determination and one for getting research into practice. The research going on in the US has been focused pretty intensely on ventilation and how ventilation affects fire patterns. There's been some terrific work going on between 2016 and 2020 at Underwriters Laboratories near Chicago, where they build full-size houses, burn them, and then change the ventilation and fix the houses up and burn them again. And there's been several dozen of these full-scale fire tests that you can get from the Underwriters Laboratory Fire Safety Research Institute, with lots and lots of videos and lots of graphs and charts. And it will help you understand how ventilation affects fires. So these are the origin determination research agendas, and develop a coordinated research program to analyze the effects that ventilation has on the creation and obscuration of patterns. Develop a coordinated research program to analyze the effect that material properties have on the nature of the pattern creation. We have a lot of new materials, particularly lightweight gypsum drywall, that behaves differently than the current gypsum drywall. Mostly it fails a lot sooner. Require that fire investigation be a component of future public funding of compartment fire research. There was so much research conducted on firefighter safety and how to fight the fire that could have been beneficial if, after the fire is put out, you go in and you look at the fire patterns and see what that tells you. So we're trying to stop the wasteful fire tests that don't go all the way to the end. Encourage fire research organizations currently conducting compartment fire research to include fire investigation components in these tests. And this is happening. In fact, fire investigation is becoming the focus of the tests beyond fire safety. Investigate the impact of room size on the generation of patterns and the validity of using those patterns in origin determination. This is a chart from the Underwriters Laboratories test that I was talking about. It was a small laundry room with an elevated origin. And it's been predicted over the years that the hot gas layer can come down from the ceiling and smother the fire. And then as the fire slows down, the hot gas layer goes back up to the ceiling and the fire gets bigger. Now we found 5 oscillations in this particular fire. And it was really fascinating to see the predictions that people had made to actually borne out in the fire test. Now, this is not likely to happen, at least we don't think it's likely to happen in large rooms, but in a small room, it can definitely work this way, where you have to consider not only the location of the origin on the floor plan, but also its elevation. And if you raise, it's called the Z factor. Steve Carman has done some good work on that, the Z factor. But when you consider that 40% of all fires are caused by cooking, which means you have an elevated origin on the stove, this is some pretty important stuff. More on origin. Develop protocols, techniques, and instrumentation to conduct measurements to quantify fire patterns reliably. Evaluate the reliability and validity of these techniques as measurable tools for pattern analysis in the process of origin determination. You know, it's too bad when a house burns that it's not already instrumented so that we can get this data. Develop a coordinated research program to analyze the effects that electrical equipment such as ground fault, circuit interrupters, and arc fault circuit interrupters have on the process of arc mapping. And one of the things that happened to NFPA 921 in the most recent edition is that arc mapping was sort of downgraded into just another pattern, and maybe a pattern that is not going to be all that helpful, because a lot of the arcing that happens behind gypsum drywall doesn't happen until late in the fire. But there was a electrical equipment component in the experiments being conducted at Underwriters Laboratories, and there's a separate report on that. Develop protocols or techniques for collecting, extracting, and analyzing data from the variety of witnesses. Develop awareness of methods for collecting, extracting, and analyzing data from the variety of electronic sources now finding their way into residential and commercial buildings. The typical American house has now got 7 or more electronic devices that will fail as a fire comes through a structure, and you can use the failure if it's being recorded, particularly if it's being recorded off-site, to track the progress of the fire. Develop practical tools that can be used by the fire investigator to evaluate fuel characteristics and the performance of fuels under fire conditions in support of understanding fire growth as it relates to origin determination. So virtual patterns is what I call them, that you get from electronics. And in my work lately, I've seen quite a few cases where the Ring doorbell camera across the street does a pretty good job of capturing what's going on during the fire. We've got cameras everywhere. Require manufacturers reporting recalls and the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, to make available data that is developed in determining a product recall that identifies its failure mechanism. This is one area that is a little frustrating here. We can see that a product's been recalled because it's a fire hazard, but that's it. They don't tell you how they know that, or they won't tell you the exact failure mechanism. We're trying to wring a little more data out of the government agencies involved in product safety. Getting research into the practice agenda. Create an easily accessible repository for the research on fire investigation. Develop a mechanism for disseminating and research conducted by the ATF. Our Bureau of ATF used to be under the Treasury Department, and it was their fire research laboratory was devoted to doing research. But after 9/11, it moved over to the Justice Department and was taken over by lawyers. So there's a ton of really good research data at the Fire Research Laboratory that they can't talk about because the lawyers won't let them. We're trying to fix that. Require that federally funded research into fire phenomenon that involves full-scale testing include a component to document post-fire conditions. Well, that's pretty obvious. It's just it's a disappointment when that doesn't happen, and more we're seeing that it happens. Develop techniques to limit the exposure of fire investigators to potentially biasing information that can be practically applied during a fire investigation. Develop techniques to identify and manage bias in the development of conclusions by fire investigators. Chapter 8 deals with strengthening oversight of fire and explosion investigation practices. And this is where we talk about certification of the individuals. And then importantly, accreditation of the certifications. Just about anybody can set up a certification body. But if that certification body is not accredited, you don't know about the quality. Then we have accreditation of fire investigation units. And there's a discussion of the Science Advisory Work Group as part of the quality control. Then a code of ethics. Everybody needs a code of ethics. So the recommendations require competency and proficiency testing for fire investigation units, both in the training and in the continued monitoring of their work product. Require accreditation of fire investigation units by third parties based on an applicable consensus standard. That is way off in the future, but it's pretty much required for other forensic science laboratories in the US to be accredited. And I believe that's also the case in Australia. Require case reviews be developed and implemented, which can include retrospective and proactive reviews. A multidisciplinary review committee can be used, such as the one implemented by the Texas State Fire Marshals. Now, people may recognize Texas as the home of the Willingham case. And in 2010, Texas was recognized as possibly the worst fire marshal's office in the States. I mean, they just got a ton of bad publicity. Well, they got a new fire marshal. He came in, he said there was a new sheriff in town, and he set up this multidisciplinary review committee called the Science Advisory Work Group that I've been privileged to participate in for 7 years now. And this really makes the work product better. If the fire investigators know that this group of scientists, mostly fire investigators, but including scientists, are going to be reviewing their work, they think hard about it. One thing that they've been doing lately is they've avoided narrowing the origin down more than can be justified. And this is something that's come out of our work with ventilation. Sometimes you can't get it down to less than, well, we know it started in this room. But in terms of narrowing it down beyond that, you'd better find some evidence to do that with and not just read fire patterns. Require fire investigation units to adopt a quality assurance system. That is easier said than done. Putting in, just writing a quality assurance manual and all the SOPs, just documenting what you do is very time consuming. It's expensive and requires a lot of attention. Require all fire investigation reports to be subject to technical and administrative reviews, and require that case documentation supports the opinions within the report. Develop a consensus standard. That's been done for the organization and operation of a fire investigation unit, and require a code of ethics. Chapter 9 deals with education and training in fire and explosion investigation. Talks about Nfpa 1033, sources of fire investigation training, the path to better education. We suggest that fire investigators should complete college-level coursework in algebra, chemistry, and physics to understand how these subjects relate to the behavior of fire. Nfpa 1033, well, this recommendation has happened. It specifies in detail what knowledge and skills investigators need to have and maintain. So that particular recommendation has been implemented, and you will see that when you read Annex D in 1033. Fire investigation units should establish a formal process for investigators' work to be subject to challenging technical review. This is not just, hey, will you read this for typos and grammatical error? It's asking investigators to routinely submit their work to a challenging technical review. Okay, the 1033 recommendation is done. Fire investigation units should be required to establish a program that provides sufficient training and continuing education. And this is where, with this kind of recommendation, you can go to the chief and say, you know, that $500 a year that you give us for training, it's not enough. It needs to be quite a bit more than that. Continuing education should be a mandatory requirement for proof that an investigator is learning up-to-date information. That kind of happened with 1033, where they finally this year said at least 8 hours a year. Well, that's not enough, but it's a number. That number can be tweaked in future editions, but it is in there now to say at least 40 hours over every 5 years. More competency and proficiency training and testing focused on specific knowledge and skills should be developed. The CFItrainer.net people are doing a lot of that work and having a great effect. If you haven't signed up, if you're not registered with CFItrainer.net, you should be. It's great, great training. It's been vetted. It is compliant with 921 and 1033, and it will help you withstand challenges. Chapter 10 is just conclusions. We do conclude that there has been a lot of progress made since 1992. Of course, we're coming up on 30 years now, when 921 was first published. There's a need to enhance education and training requirements, even though NFPA 1033 still says all you need is a high school education. But at the end, it does say that's not going to help you with fire dynamics. And a standard for the operation of fire investigation units is underway, coming soon. It is actually now open for comment. I would invite all of you to visit the NFPA website and see what's up there. 921 has already closed its comment period for the 2024 edition, but 1321 is something you should look at. And if you see something that you want to see changed, have at it. Accreditation against a consensus standard needs to be the goal. FIUs need to implement methods to minimize the impact of potential bias and enhance focus on research to further develop fire investigations as needed. So a path forward for each stakeholder. The standards development community should develop a consensus standard. That's coming soon. It should also specify in detail what investigators need to know. That has been done. Annex D will probably give you a little heartburn, but it's a done deal. For each fire investigation units, they should implement a team approach, implement information management practices, and implement practices to minimize potential bias. They should require investigation reports to include all of the data collected, all of the hypotheses formulated, details of the testing of each hypothesis. Now, some data doesn't allow you to make a new hypothesis. It's just not, there's not enough to it. But you should write down your hypotheses, make a list of what supports them and what refutes them. And usually the hypothesis with the fewest cons, the fewest refutations, is likely to be the correct one. Require technical and administrative reviews, require competency and proficiency testing, and require case reviews. They can be retrospective or proactive, although it's easier to do the retrospective than the proactive ones. Establish a formal process for the work to be subject to a challenging technical review, adopt a quality assurance system, and provide sufficient training so that fire investigators meet the requirements of 1033. Accreditation bodies, they need to provide the infrastructure for accreditation of FIUs, and they need to require the adoption of a code of ethics. Higher education. We don't have a whole lot of opportunities for higher education and fire investigation. There need to be more. We do identify the best programs in the US, but we have to have more opportunities for that. We have to have more continuing education, and we need to develop competency and proficiency training. Research funding institutions, they should give us money so that we can run these tests and focus on methods to transfer new technology to practicing investigators. It doesn't do us any good if the scientists learn everything about fire investigation but don't communicate that to the people in the field. The legal community should require accreditation of fire investigation units. They should require reports to include all the data collected, all the hypotheses formulated, and they should require adherence of fire investigators and fire investigation units to consensus documents. Not just say, oh, Nfpa 921 is only a guide, so we don't have to follow it. Fire investigators themselves, they should complete college level coursework in algebra, chemistry, and physics. They should complete continuing education and document that continuing education. And they should complete competency and proficiency training. All right, so I said I was going to go for an hour. I went just about an hour. Happy to collect any questions you might have. I think what have we got going in the chat?
Thanks, John. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we got one there, Mike. What do you think is the minimum standard of education FIs in Australia with regard to what courses are available here? Also, is EMPS provided by AFAC an appropriate system of certification and should be enhanced and encouraged? So that's a bit Australian focused there. You might not know about that, John. For me, I can probably answer a couple of that. Standard of education for FIs, unfortunately in Australia, there's only really two sort of courses that offer. One is the Charles Sturt University course in fire investigation. It's only a graduate certificate. And the other is the Canberra Institute of Technology, the Advanced Diploma in Fire Investigation. Those are the two main ones. I'd certainly recommend a fire investigator do at least one of those. They're not cheap, but obviously the graduate certificate is at a higher level of the Australian qualifications framework, sits at level 8, whereas the advanced diploma sits at level 6. You can certainly contact me after this or an email or something, and I can give you more information about that. The EMPS provided by AFAC, that's the Emergency Management Professionalisation Scheme. Yes, so they have a relatively new 2019 introduced their own registered and certified in fire investigator. It's for obviously public agencies. I have done the certified, and it's sort of a little bit like the CFI program, but nothing really like it in terms of what you have to do for that to do it. But they are trying to increase the professionalisation of fire investigation in the country, and I think it's a good program, and it's AFAC backed. So yeah, that can certainly is something you can look at. But Mick, if you want to talk to me more about it, certainly contact me on mobile or something, or email, and I can talk more about that for you. Grant, chapter 7 slide, is there an example of how preventing bias pressure will be achieved? Good brackets, I may have some words mixed here. Can you?
Yeah, let me just.
Oh, sorry,
comment.
yeah, Grant, yep.
Yeah, that slide skipped past a little bit quick for me. And so I noticed the next slide was chapter 8, but there was, John was mentioning something like there would be some requirement to prevent fire investigators being exposed to becoming biased, but I'd like some more comment on that, or an example or something like that, if you could, John.
There's actually a page in the book that has got a chart, and the left column is relevant information, and the right column is potentially biasing information that is not relevant to the task of origin and cause determination. So you don't really need to know that the man and wife got into a screaming match the night before the fire. It doesn't help you determine where the fire started, but it might help in developing suspects later on. There's even a history. A person's criminal history is not something that is going to help you determine the origin and cause. We have a process that has been proposed called linear sequential unmasking, and you only let the analyst, the person that's trying to decide what the evidence means, you only let them know things that they need to know in order to develop their hypotheses and test them. An example being the person in the laboratory who gets your samples. He doesn't need to know whether you think that's an arson fire or not. He already knows that you suspect ignitable liquids in the samples. So there are things you just don't need to say. So what you knew and when you knew it is something that should be documented. I'd have to pull up the chart to.
That's great. That's great, John. That helps a lot. Yeah, makes it very clear. Thank you. And I'll go and read that.
I would suggest you go to the website and read the document, because I've just gone over to the very tip top of it today.
Yep. No, that's fine. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Angus asked a question. With increasing wildfire activity globally, can you see a point where wildfire gets more attention, not just in Nfpa, but also across industry for professional development?
Well, it's got to be first. You have to get the attention of the Nfpa to write things down. The wildfire chapter in 921 did not change from 2017 to 2021 because there is so much controversy about it. We've got a cadre of people here in the United States that think they know how to do wildfire investigations, and they don't think it has a lot to do with the scientific method. So they've, needless to say, had a hard time with the 921 committee, but there are a bunch of them, and they, I don't know, they're working on rewriting chapter 27 in Nfpa 921 as we speak. It is very controversial.
Yes. And
it's not been that much research, and it's a lot harder to do research. This is one area, where we do test fires, or not test fires, prevention fires. What do they call it? Where you go out and you actually start small wildland fires to remove the brush, to make it make it burn less vigorously when it does catch fire. Those could be used, but doing actual research on wildland fires is a whole lot trickier than doing compartment fires.
Yes, I know that Richard Woods is online, and he's on the committee for the Wildfire Cause and Origin Handbook. I don't know if he wants to say anything, Richard, about changes in 10, what's coming up in the Nfpa and wildfire.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, look, it's a parallel process at the moment. The NWCG content is being updated as we speak. And in fact, one of the reps from Nfpa is working with us on that. John might be able to help me out with his name. But nevertheless, that the NWCG book plus the chapter in Nfpa is also being rewritten as well. So it will evolve to produce a new product pretty soon. So, you know, keep an eye out for that next year. There's certainly a lot of process within the current NWCG handbook that is still valid. There is certainly the recognition of the scientific method is certainly built in there, and it's we're certainly not swaying away from that at all. But hopefully by sort of this time next year, we'll see some new products coming through and a rewrite of the handbook itself.
Yes, thanks, Richard.
That's a fight I've tried to stay out of. I get in enough fights, and I don't know enough about wildland to get into it.
Well said. Yes. There's a question from Ken. He's too busy to type, so he's typed it to me. He's saying that in the FIU, the new sort of NFPA 1321 about the standard of FIU, he's asking about what about private fire investigators? Like, how are they looked at? I guess that is his question, unless he's online. He wants to actually say something about it. But it's about, I think he's trying to get at, like, the FIU NFPA 1321 is at obviously public agencies. How do privates, I guess, sort of, do they use that, or is there something they can use or which is going to be similar to that? Or
well, if they are a big enough organization
yep.
and they want to seek accreditation, they can use the same document as the public sector.
Yeah. Okay.
There is a bit of controversy right now about the single shingle guys. Guys like myself.
There's plenty of them out here too.
Yeah, I'm certified. I follow 921, but I don't expect to apply for accreditation.
Yeah.
But somebody could conceivably apply for accreditation, and we're hoping in the OSAC to draft or complete the draft of a quality assurance manual template. It's going to say, look, don't copy this, but you use it as a, you know, you fill in names, and you can use this template to help you write a quality assurance manual, which is really hard to do if you're starting from scratch. The same goes with standard operating procedures. We're trying to collect those and get them written as templates. So you might be able to do it as a sole practitioner.
I think Ken should.
I don't know whether you I don't think it's ever going to be that you have to, and certainly it's more work than I want to undertake. But I'm going to write the templates. So
there you go. Question from me. I guess you've been in the industry for so long, John. What have you seen over your time, 40 plus years? I guess what's a good thing you've seen in changing in the fire investigation, and I guess what's a bad thing that you've seen over that 40 years in the industry?
Well, I've seen a lot of improvement.
Okay.
I have seen a ton of improvement. I used to be sort of a voice crying in the wilderness. I spent quite a few years in the heresy box where people
turn that round candle, you know, on the side there. Yeah,
Shane, turn off your voice. Shane, mute. Thank you. Sorry, say again, John.
So, anyways, one of my favorite quotations is from the great scientist Max Planck, who says that science doesn't advance because people achieve new insights or they see that their colleague is correct. Science advances one funeral at a time. As the dinosaurs die off, and the people that you know, I don't think there's anybody that publicly disagrees with the need for scientific methodology in fire investigation now. 20 years ago, we had serious fights. I mean, people, for the 2001 edition of 921, we got like 500 proposals to remove the word science from 921. It took a long time. So
Yeah.
I think things have gotten immeasurably better over the last 30 years since 921 has been out there. And since people have started to focus on
Yes,
the fact
no water.
that we didn't know, and we didn't know what we were doing back then. And the thing that really messed up fire investigation was the change in the fuels in furniture. Dan Madrikowski from Underwriters has got a great presentation on legacy furniture versus modern furniture. He talks about grandma's sofa, and he's got a side-by-side video of grandma's sofa burning and not turning to liquid, not making liquid puddles on the floor, and taking 30 minutes to become fully involved. Whereas a modern sofa will go up and it'll take a room to flash over in 4 minutes. So the change in the materials that we surround ourselves with really messed us up, because the people that were used to dealing with grandma's sofas were teaching people that are working in the 70s with polyurethane foam. So that is a huge problem. But we also are getting a much better understanding of ventilation and how it affects fire progression. So I think I can't say that there's anything that's bad that's happening. Certainly there are people that don't want to spend money on training, and the chief would much rather have a new truck than to train his fire investigators. But that's the case everywhere.
Yeah. And I guess what would be your recommendation for someone just starting out in the field, and also for someone who's been in the field a long time? What would your recommendation be for them to do, like a practical thing for them to do?
Well, for the people that have been around a while, just pay attention to what's happening. Don't believe that you know everything just because you've been around for 20, 30 years. I mean, there's some people have 20 years experience, and other people have 1 year of experience that they repeat 19 times. And for the young people, I would say get as much education as you can. When people ask me what to do, I want to be a fire investigator. I say, why don't you become a fire protection engineer? And then you'll have something to fall back on if you don't enjoy fire investigation and all that comes with it, and you make a lot more money as a fire protection engineer. But people that study fire in that way certainly are going to understand it a lot better than somebody who doesn't have a clue, or somebody who can't define a watt.
And a question from Bobby was saying, and you mentioned about getting certified and things like that. Doing the CFI program through the IAAI or CFEI through NAFI or FIT, is that a form of accreditation, or getting yourself certified, or doing better, or?
It's a form of quality assurance, but it's not accreditation. I mean, accreditation applies to organizations.
Oh, okay.
Certification applies to individuals.
But yeah, you certainly do recommend doing those.
I recommend it, but it doesn't mean that you know everything. Some of the dumbest people I've ever met have a CFI.
Just in clarification there, I'm a huge organization of one and spend a lot of time with my nose buried in books. And I regularly come up with experts from the other side. So far, I've had one fellow tell me that copper melts at 700 degrees, glass melts at several hundred degrees hotter than copper, steel melts at 1,300 degrees, and I don't think he's ever picked up 921 or 1033.
Yeah.
Right. People that get hung up on temperature are going to make big mistakes. And yes. 921, since the first edition, has said that wood and gasoline burn at essentially the same temperature.
Yeah, exactly. Well, John, I think that's about it. There's no more other questions, I don't think. Yep, that looks good. Listen, I'd really like to thank you for your time. I know it's late or getting late in the evening, and you have sort of put yourself out to do this for us in Australia here in the morning. So I do appreciate your time. I've certainly enjoyed Nick Lee doing his ironing, and it's been a great entertainment. Yes, he's got a wave there. Yeah, well done, mate. You're husband of the year there for you, for sure. Thanks again, John. Next, in December, we're actually going to get the chair of the technical committee of 1033, Dan Heenan, to give a presentation. So if you want to be around for that, which is the changes as John was talking about, the 2022 edition of 1033. Thanks again, John. Do appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll meet up one day again in the US. We should be back into traveling next year. And
hey, I teach a 3-day course.
Oh, yes, that's right.
I teach a 3-day course, and I'd be happy to come over there and teach it for you.
Yes, you're still available.
Based on
yes, and the book. Yep, he's got his book out there.
That's the handout for the course.
Yeah, and I've got the copy, the 3rd edition. So certainly, I highly recommend that too. Great reading for any fire investigator.
All right,
we'll wrap it up now. I've gone a bit over time. Thank you for being online. For those who have joined us, and thank you, John. And see you again soon.
bye.
Thank you.
Well, that went well.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Very good.
Thanks. Hey, Grant.
Right.
Look at Nick, still going.
Yep.
He's still
Bye,
going,
everyone.
Nick. He's unbelievable.